if they're going to be against the Russians, anybody that looks like has got a drop of African in their blood is going to be catching hell.
Para que se asustan será pa' mejor. Es el pueblo entero el que ya está gritando. ¡Viva la revolución!
Iranian nuclear weapons development.
They have turned the island into a communist hellhole.
The experiment in Venezuela has failed completely.
By the way, I was walking into one of these places places where the Ukrainian military had hold of, and they were using it to shoot at the Lugansk People's Republic soldiers. And you look in the wall, we walked in there, they have all these shells and stuff going on, and I look in the wall, and there's a big swastika right on the wall.
Oh, shit. What the fuck? Damn.
And so, I knew people would think, oh, maybe they just painted that just for your benefit. So,
yeah.
So I took my finger, I wet it, and I scrubbed up and down on this thing as hard as I could. And I looked at my finger. My finger was clean. This thing had been on there for a while.
Wow.
So that's the folks who were in there.
Yeah.
He talked to the people about what's going on, and they definitely said, yeah, not everybody in the military was fascists or Nazis, but the ones who were leading them were. So
yeah, that's crazy. Wow.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask you, John. By the way, shout out to everybody who's in the chat. We got a good amount of comrades who are watching and listening to this. Really great questions on deck. One thing I wanted to ask you, John, before I take some of the other questions, as a Black militant anti-imperialist, as an anti-fascist, how did you feel in Ukraine being somewhere where you have a swastika and somewhere as common as a supermarket, you have a fascist battalion roaming the streets? Like, what was going through your mind? Like, how did that make you feel? Because I could imagine that must have been intense,
Yeah, the part that really gets to you is that, well, you kind of feel isolated in your own, and here, when the way the anti-war movement and folks who call themselves anti-imperialists were just poo-pooing the fascist problem in Ukraine away like it didn't really matter. Usually it was like white men who were doing that, by the way.
Yeah, it's true. Yep.
It's like, yeah, okay, I get you don't get it, but we're the ones who get attacked in this country by these white supremacist forces. And the fact is that they go there to the Ukraine and get training. I mean, there's like thousands and thousands of people around the world, fascist groups, that go to the Ukraine to get military training and then come back and use it against folks, especially people of color and stuff. So yeah, just seeing that and realizing how much money is going to these forces is really disheartening. But I asked there was a group of elderly women that were at one of these camps. It was a village that had been occupied by Ukraine, and the Russian and Lugansk forces pushed them out. So they were able to, some of them were able to return and all that kind of stuff. So that was, and we asked them a bunch of questions. And I said this thing, I said, well, what do you think about the people who think that they send money to the Ukraine and everything, and the Ukrainians are helping, stop these Russians from hurting you and things? What do you think about that? And there was a word they used. I can't remember what damn word it was in Russian, but they were all laughing and saying this word. Basically, they were saying stupid. that's just stupid.
Yeah, bullshit.
And I was glad I was able to get them to laugh too, because they're going through much. I mean, I was trying to talk to them about what it was like when the Ukrainian military was there, and a lot of them just didn't even want to talk about it. They just put their heads down and just shook their heads. It was like the horror of these forces. But yeah, this thing is, that's one of the reasons we went there, is to really kind of expose this. When I first got there to Lugansk, I did an interview, and then they had me as part of this conference of religious leaders. And I had done some work with the SCLC on the grocery store closings and things. So they kind of wanted to get me in there, so they kind of used that to get me in this conference. And it was this huge hall, huge conference, and it was all religious leaders, Mufti from the Grand Mufti from Russia, and other religious leaders, Orthodox leaders and things were there. And the topic of discussion was combating Nazi propaganda in the Ukraine because it's taking hold. So it's a huge problem, and we got to kind of shake the anti-war movement here to understand that you're promoting fascism when you're not talking about it, when you're saying it doesn't exist, when you're saying this is a Russian invasion. You're promoting fascism. It's
exactly.
You're also leaving the people of Donbass out in the cold. I mean, what kind of allies are?
Shout out to Comrade Dust James. Any thoughts on the treatment of African students by the Ukrainian military and police?
Oh yeah, that's another indication of fascism, right? The fact that they wouldn't let, and Poland's collaboration with these fascists in the Ukraine, how the African students, and not only students, I think there were doctors and other folks that were there that were just trying to get out like everybody else because of the war situation, and they wouldn't let them out. I mean, they wouldn't let them. They prioritized the Ukrainians. They were telling them, we're prioritizing Ukrainians first, and so they had all these African students and folks that couldn't get out, and their treatment in Ukraine is not not desirable as well. So it really shows. I mean, they push this ultra nationalism in Ukraine, and it's against the Russian people. They stopped folks from even being able to use their language in the stores and the schools. We talked to some folks in the shelters about how their children were suffering, their education was suffering because they were told that they couldn't speak Russian, and they couldn't, and the kids were having a hard time learning and things like that. So all of these kinds of things were happening against the Russian-speaking population because of this ultra nationalism that was being pushed. And of course, if they're going to be against the Russians, anybody that looks like has got a drop of African in their blood is going to be catching hell.
Of course.
And
especially
it's also,
if you're a leftist too.
Yeah, and it's also kind of funny how when they were trying to isolate Russia and get all these for everybody to get against the sanctions in Russia and all this stuff, and to condemn them, a lot of the folks in the African countries, in the African continent, a lot of the countries in Africa said, no, we're not going to condemn Russia. They're the only ones that are actually helping us with the economic problems that the IMF and the World Bank and others are doing. And, so it's kind of interesting how they couldn't get the African countries in Africa to follow along.